Welcome back to another episode of Cerulean Skies, where today we're going to be taking a look at the beautiful South Atlantic map. And I have to say, I am really jazzed up about this map. It reminds me of country that I've lived in for much of my life. For much of my life, I lived in the wilds of Alaska and the northwoods of Canada, and it is amazing to me just how similar so much of this country is to that kind of landscape. It's my favorite kind of landscape. I think it's absolutely beautiful. And while it's wild and barren and mountainous, that's the kind of country I love. So the idea of being able to take a virtual tour over this kind of landscape by way of flying my favorite aircraft in DCS, the fabulous FA-18, it really appeals. And as always in DCS, the water's really well rendered, the land and the sky. As we all know, the map is huge, and Razbam had to cut down on the accuracy of the textures in some of the places in order that the map did not occupy a vast amount of memory. I read somewhere that the map would have had to use the very best textures everywhere, something like a quarter of a terabyte. So they made a compromise and put in really good textures in those areas they figured would be those of high interest, such as the Falkland Islands, and used somewhat lesser textures elsewhere, which I think is a reasonable compromise, especially for a map of this size that offers so much prospect in the way of scenarios and campaigns that can be played out in the region, and so much accuracy and visual beauty. So we have just launched from Ushuaia Airport, which is on the mainland out in the mountains. I know a lot of people have been really jazzed up to see the Falkland Islands. The Falkland Islands remind me a lot of Scotland, another place in the world that I really love. But this mountainous country, I was really excited to take a look at that. All the valleys and gorges and glaciers, just gorgeous country. So I thought we'd fly some low and fly some high and take a look at what this landscape has to offer us up close and personal. I've just circled us back to fly over Ushuaia Airport, and you can see that the airport itself is set on a little islet. I don't know if that isthmus that connects the island to the mainland is natural or if it was built there, but in either case, it's really beautiful. And the airport itself is a single runway airport set out in this body of water, which, if it were in Europe, I would be called a fjord, I'm sure. And it's about all these mountains, which to me are as beautiful as the Alps. I've set the map to show light cloud cover to give us a little sampling of everything we can come across on this map. Of course, we're not going to come across storms. I don't think you can mix light cloud cover and storms, or at least have scattered smaller storms, at least not yet, not in the way you would have in real-world weather. But we'll make do and enjoy what is here. Pulling up to near Six Angels, we get a breathtaking view of the landscape below. And what we're going to do is fly roughly due west for about 60 to 70 miles, dipping low and going high, rolling over these mountain peaks, flying down into those gorgeous gorges, skimming over the fjords and the glaciers, and just take a little time to really immerse ourselves in this map's visual beauty. I've always loved the visual beauty of DCS. I mean, it is first and foremost a combat flight simulator, and it's very, very good at that. The realism, I think, is just unparalleled, and it's one of the things that always draws me back to DCS. But the creators haven't gotten so lost in making it realistic that they forgot the value of the visual beauty. And while this is only a flight simulator, it does portray it well. One can see this as we fly over the waters of this fjord, skimming just a few hundred feet over them, with steep mountainsides to the left and the right, and the sunrise-lit water shining like a mirror as it expands out in front of us. This is the kind of place that one could imagine the Lord of the Rings story taking place. It would have made a good alternative New Zealand for the Lord of the Rings. I love how realistic this map is, in the way that the water did not just suddenly come to an end but rather where the fjord is being fed by a stream which we can trace as we run along this mountain valley. The creators at Rasbam put a lot of effort into this, really portraying an alluvial valley quite well. Now, as we come up out of the valley, we're going to go ahead and gain some altitude and get up over those peaks. I have to admit, I'm pretty well tempted to dive down to the right and trace that next valley. I've always loved doing that with drones. Every valley seems to possess its own character and secrets. But we're just going to work on getting up over these mountaintops here and taking a look at the real high country of this map and seeing what it has to offer. So, look at the delineated tree line there. It's not perfectly delineated. It's broken up like it would be in real life. And we see areas where the snow cover is heavier than in others, also like we would see in real life. There was just so much gorgeous detail put into making this. And off to the left, we can see our first glacier. It is very well rendered. Take it from a guy who's been up close and personal with many glaciers in the past in my time in such North Country. This is what a glacier would look like from the air. Let's get down there and take a closer look at it. Just a little bit of trivia here, but generally it is death to go walking across one of those glaciers. You run a good risk of falling into a crevasse, and if you do, you might as well have vanished from the face of the earth. The odds of ever being found again are very slim, and the odds of surviving such a fall are pretty slim too, and even if you do, the cold will get you soon. Nonetheless, I love this kind of country. I love the stark ruggedness of it. I guess it's what's always drawn me to live in these kinds of places. And it's because I have lived so much of my life in these kinds of places that I find this map just so very appealing. This is a landscape where if an actual fighter pilot were shot down and had to bail over these mountaintops, well, their odds might be pretty good of not being picked up by the enemy, but they would have to survive a very harsh landscape. I imagine this would be harder than surviving at sea if one went down in the water. It's going to be cold, it's going to be windblown, the wind chill factor would be terrible, and there wouldn't be fuel about to make a fire with, nor would one be able to find much in the way of food. All right, we are coming up on another one of those beautiful fjords. Let's fly down there and have a close look. Gorgeous. Now, let's get ourselves back on track. When I decided to do this flight, I loaded up with 3 extra fuel tanks, as I was planning on doing a lot of climbing and diving, a lot of use of afterburners, and unlike an actual mission where I'd be aiming for cover or to be efficient, I'm just aiming to make this one fun. And the decision was well worth it. Look at the little mountain lake just beneath the snow-covered mountaintop there. It even looks like the lake is frozen over, which in reality, with the snow falling this low, it probably would be. Let's skim really low over that ridge and have a close look at the ground. The textures in this part of the map are somewhat neglected. They are not the best, obviously. This looks like video game map tech from maybe 15, 20 years back. But on the other hand, it is intentional, and it keeps the map from being, well, a memory hog. And in truth, it seems to work really well, because one of the things I noticed immediately upon the first time I ever tried flying over this map was there weren't any frame rate issues. You can see for yourself the flight is quite smooth. And I'm using a good video card, but not the very best. I have a 3070 in my system. It's a good video card, and it handles this enormous map quite well, including portraying the F-18 flying smoothly and all of that gorgeous terrain down there, water reflections. I have All the graphic settings in DCS absolutely maxed. All except for, I think, the length of shadows, which apparently makes a big difference in frame rates. And there was some testing that was shown to affect that. That was from 6, maybe 9 months ago. Maybe that problem has been changed since then. But with everything else set to absolute maximum or ultimate rendering, this map is still beautifully smooth. Now, doubtless if I was flying a mission and there were a lot of assets on the ground and in the air that the computer had to think about as well, I'd lose a few frames per second, but even so, I can live with this quite readily. This is really, really good. I do wish something could be done about those repetitive terrain textures down there too. I understand why it's there. It's just disappointing to see. The repetitive terrain textures, more than anything else, to me, they take away from the sense of immersion that one gets out of a simulator like DCS. I mean, we just don't see anything repeat like that, not even close in the real world. So visually speaking, that's kind of a visual deal breaker. Not so much I wouldn't buy this map. I still really like this map. It's just a shame to see it. And when you look at the scenery out there in the distance, hey, I guess I can live with the trade-off. That I've been in country like that, and well, this feels nostalgic to me. Island country down there. When I lived further north up on the coast, used to go fishing in country like that, and we'd drop an anchor and drop a fish trap and spend the night there and wake up and find the fish trap full of 6-inch long prawns, and that would be breakfast. This map, for me, it brings back great memories. So we're going to swing north here and begin the next leg of the journey. We're going to fly a bit north to over a beautiful, huge fjord. And we're going to follow that fjord most of the way back to Ushuaia. We are presently up around 8 angels, and that puts us a couple, 2,000 or 3,000 feet over the highest mountaintops and gives us a pretty good view of things. We're not really flying in that most efficient part of the atmosphere, what pilots sometimes call Bladeland, up around 20 to 30 angels, but we don't have to be. It's only a sim. We're just here right now to enjoy the scenery. Let's get down lower, skim over the ground. I see us coming up on a beautiful gorge up ahead, and it'll be fun to fly through that. Let's take a look at the Earth up close and personal. Beautiful place of light and shadow. The light and shadow are so well rendered. Let's get off this major watercourse and follow this little gorge right here and see where it goes. We're down in the deep shadow of a very cold gorge. Icy waters and snow-touched ground everywhere. I get the feeling the team at Razbam, even over these really wild areas, took the time to really put some effort into this. I can't imagine an automated algorithm being sophisticated enough to render a landscape this accurately. So that the fact that the landscape renders detail, like when the land is locked in shadow, in a place like that deep gorge, when it's locked in shadow more than other places, how it'll be colder, how the water's more likely to be frozen than other waters. These details, they count for a lot. What they mean is that Razbam really put effort even into the wild places. Now, I don't like the way that these mountaintops here, though, come to these perfect points. It too kind of kills the the sense of immersion in the map, because you just don't see that in reality. In reality, you don't have perfect repetitions, you don't have perfect circles, you don't have perfect points. Anything that looks perfect, well, it kills the sense of immersion. Hopefully that's something that at some point they'll patch out of the system so that we don't see any more of these perfect edges and ridges. The forest is nicely rendered here too. The trees aren't picture perfect, but they are pretty well rendered. It's a lot like what a forest and forest shadow would look like when the sun is low on the horizon. I know Razbam has put a whale asset on the water. I'll have to take a look at that sometime. But for right now, what I'm fascinated with is the landscape itself. I wish here and there we might see some other wildlife, like birds flying around. That would really give it an awesome sense of reality. Certainly when you're in an airplane, the last thing you want to do is get close to birds, and birds and airplanes don't mix. But to see a flock of aquatic birds settling on the water, or see some flocks flying around below, it's a little thing, but it's a little thing that would go a lot toward adding that gorgeous sense of immersion. The map already portrays this really, really well, but it would just give it a bit more. Alright, I've put the afterburners on. Let's really gain some angels here. And what say we have a little fun doing it? We have almost reached the gorge that we were heading for, where we are going to turn back east. And we have to go a little bit further, but we'll just go ahead and start a gentle turn in the direction of east, which will eventually take us back to Ushuaia. If you look upper right on the HUD, you're going to see we are somewhere between 16 and 17 angels right now, offering our highest view yet of the landscape down below. As with most flight sims, the higher you go, the more realistically the landscape is rendered. Now notice down there on the way the cloud cover crosses over the landscape. The clouds work their way around the mountain ridges, and off on the lower right, they appear to stop at the ridges. These are atmospheric dynamics like one would actually see around mountain country. We're not going to fly down there just now, but it would be interesting to fly over such an area and see if the sim is rendering things as realistic as thermals, which would in reality be beginning to rise up those mountainsides just now. Some thermals would be quite interesting to fly through. Who knows? Maybe one of these days DCS will give us a sailplane to mess with, or perhaps some modders out there have already created a sailplane. This would be gorgeous country to go cruising over with a sailplane, and one could do some very interesting things riding thermals and playing in air currents over a rough country like this. The play of lights and shadow over the landscape and even over the clouds it's just extremely well done. I think part of that is Razbam, and part of that is the DCS or Eagle Dynamics team themselves, which have done such a good job over the years that DCS has been around, really perfecting all of this.
Anchor 25, how copy, just by one.
Down on the lower left, it looks like we have some high boreal country, which in North America would be a great place to find blueberries and cranberries, and one would see a lot of tundra bush there. That kind of ground also tends to be very difficult to walk on and quite wet. And you'll see when we do another flight over the Falkland Islands that we get very similar country to this, that tundra-like country or heath-like country, lots of wetlands and ponds and such in between. Probably a lot of berries there, but I can't say for sure. I know what subarctic bush country is like, but not in South America. We're going to slowly bleed off some altitude here, and as we get closer to the ground, we'll start looking for some interesting sights to see. This is a wild area, so we're not going to find much in the way of cities or touristy locations. Maybe we'll find some interesting rock formations or waterfalls. It'll be interesting to see if Razbam decided to put such things in the map as well. I see some interesting red color and green color down there below a mountain ridge just over the sea, or I should say the fjord. But the difference in terrain indicates to me that there might be something like subarctic tundra type terrain just underneath a forest, perhaps taiga-like forest. Let's fly down there and see how well that is rendered. Overall, it looks pretty good, and while I can't say I'm really familiar with the terrain like we would find in South America, this does look very much like what terrain would look like. Mountainous terrain near fjords and water, steep terrain where you have broken woods and open ground up here in Canada, especially once you start getting as high as Newfoundland or about a quarter of the way up any of the western provinces. Lots of coniferous forests down there, which break here and there, revealing rocky terrain and little bits of open ground, meadows, and I won't say prairie. Perhaps somewhere else on this map we would find large expanses of open ground like prairie.
Phaser 1, Anchor 26 070,
We are now about half the way back to Ushuaia. Let's fly up more toward the middle of the water and start watching more carefully to either side or either coast and see if we see any other interesting landmarks or formations.
Tracking to the east, altitude 16,000.
The island out there looks interesting. Little islands like that in fjords and rivers always interest me, mainly because I like to fish too, and those are great places to go fishing and camping. But as far as the simulator goes, it doesn't look like there's any particular reason to check that out. Alright, there's a little ravine coming up just ahead. Let's do a little fancy flying and dip into there and take a close look at things. Very interesting subarctic geology related in the map. And I really like the sharp way here that the water meets the sea. In these types of areas, the mountains tend to dive straight down into the sea, not creating much of a beach. When I fished and camped in terrain like this, just setting out on the boat, once we got off the coast, the water could drop as much as 100 feet in, say, 20 or 30 feet of moving the boat. Which is to say that above water and below, the mountains are very steep. And these maps reflect that geological reality quite well. Again, well done, Razbam. The gorges here are really well done too. I wonder if they're really this wild and empty. Like if I were really taking a flight over this terrain over there, would I find this country to be this wild? It's a nice thought. Just going to skim right over the tops of these trees, almost enough to shave them, but no signs of birds. Not that I was really expecting any. It would just be a nice surprise. But the woods here are really beautifully rendered. It really makes me want to go camping. We've just passed over another very beautiful area where another mountain stream comes down to meet the fjord. And while some might note that the textures here are not the absolute best, for me what is of real importance here is that the nature of the landscape is very realistic. And if you look ahead, on the left side of the map, that white area, it looks like there's a little waterfall out there. I wonder if that's rendered very well. Let's go take a look. We're going to have to come hard and back around to try to get that into view. Interesting. There's a small boat down there. Maybe a small fishing boat or tourist boat. Whatever the case, I like that. That's one of those real immersion building things, that little bit of activity down there that makes the map seem like something other than a static place. And if you look just off on the right real quick, you can see that waterfall just out there. It's there, it's present, it's just not very well rendered, which is a shame. I wish that had been done better, but who knows, maybe down the road. Alright, we'll start working on gaining some altitude, because when we reach the end of this leg of the journey, we're going to have to cross over the mountains to get back to Ushuaia. One last dip off to the left though, to try to take one more look at that little waterfall. There's just not really all that much to see with it just yet. It's nice to know that it's there. It's realistic in that it's part of the map, but maybe one of these days we'll see some kind of better rendering or animation, better portraying a waterfall. Waterfalls do tend to be a weakness with visual rendering within all the flight simulators that I'm familiar with, like the Microsoft Flight Simulator, so well known for its beautifully rendered Earth. Well, the waterfalls in it tend to look pretty sad. They don't really look like a waterfall. Maybe one day, modern technology will reach the place where it can make a waterfall look like a waterfall. Here's to hoping. But look up ahead. That was the negative, talking about the waterfall. Look up ahead, though, at the reflection of the mountains on the water. Now, that is pretty remarkable. That's beautifully rendered. And that little natural cove back there, that looks to me like that should have some sort of settlement in it. I could imagine that certainly some fishermen would gather in a place like that, because it's a naturally safe place to hold your boats. But again, this is wild country, and maybe people just are not everywhere all over the place here, which would be great. The sun rising over those mountains off in the distance is just as gorgeous as anything else on this map. The play of light and shadow, the dynamic range between light and shadow, is something that's really well done here. So now we're going to really work on getting that altitude back. We're just going to make a little bit more headway, and then we're going to begin a fairly easy climb, rapid by the standards of civilian aircraft for sure, but a fairly easy climb. And what I want you to pay attention to when we begin that climb is the way this mountainous countryside opens out into less mountainous terrain before you, off in every direction. It is, well, not to put too fine a point on it, it is just cinematically rendered. And at this point, I think I'm going to go and open up the screen to its full width. Because honestly, that's really the only way to properly and fully appreciate the scale, the magnitude, and the vast beauty portrayed in this map, I think. Perhaps VR would even reveal it better. This map is incredibly immersive and incredibly beautiful. And I hope that DCS or Razbam give us some campaigns to fly on this map sometime soon. I'm certain the modders will be coming out some things, probably already have a few things out there for use on this map. But some real serious good campaigns for this map, including the Falkland War and even modern combat, would be well worth it. What a setting to fly in. Right about here, this map reminds me of the Black Sea map, the original map that comes with DCS. It's one of the two free ones. You know, DCS has recently added the Marianas Trench, that island and oceanic area. But there are some similarities here to the mountains over the Black Sea region. Some, not a lot. This region is more noteworthy for its ruggedness, its wild beauty, its gorges and fjords. It has its own unique special character, and I might go so far as to say its own unique special light. But again, nostalgia, you know, maybe I'm just biased to like this map in particular. Especially as it reminds me of so many regions of the world that over the years I've come to think of as home. In any event, we are now flying over those mountain ranges and coming up on Ushuaia, where we'll be putting down soon. And up ahead is the fjord, over which we're going to find the little island of Ushuaia and our little runway that, for the time being, we're calling home. Now we're just going to bank around to the west and start losing altitude. If you look upper right of the HUD, you can see Ushuaia out there. We'll zoom in on it. If you choose to fly over here, be aware that, at least as of right now, Ushuaia does not have TACAN or ILS. So a return trip is going to be based on your aircraft's GPS or INS system, at night on your infrared, and if it's daytime, the old Mark 1 eyeball.
All taxi sent Mike 95.
On the other hand, if you've flown DCS for a while, that really shouldn't present any particular problem. It's a good long runway, it's nice and wide, and it's easy to manage. Well, that's our tour of the mountains, fjords, and gorges around Ushuaia. And I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. This is a really beautiful map. If you hadn't already gotten the South Atlantic map, consider getting it. I think you'll like it. And by the way, this isn't a paid promotion. I bought this map with my own funds. I wasn't asked by RASBAM or DCS to do anything. I mean, heck, I'm just a small YouTuber with 650 people thereabouts on this channel at this time. And I just like this map. I genuinely like this map. It's a gorgeous map. And I'm convinced this map offers a tremendous amount, and it's nice to finally see some activity being offered on the western side of the hemisphere. So, happy flying, and perhaps I'll see you in the air sometime. Maybe you'll shoot me down, or maybe I'll get you. And as always, thank you for joining me here on the Cerulean Skies channel. If you like this channel's content, the tours of the maps and campaigns, the information on really great sims such as DCS and sci-fi stuff such as Nebulous and even Star Citizen occasionally, please take a moment to like and subscribe. It really helps.